God bless you. God bless you. God bless you. My name is Jose Garcia, and I have the privilege, the honor today to be able to share my testimony. First and foremost, all glory be to God, Most High, because if it hadn't been for God, I wouldn't be here today sharing this testimony with you. A lot of you guys know me just throughout the church in San Bruno for, when I was attending Iglesia de Dios, Fuente de Agua Viva, Pastors Mirandas, and also visited Pastor Otto. So thank you again for the invitation. It's been a pleasure. It's exciting. Anytime that we have to do something for Christ, when we get to glorify Christ for what He has done in our lives, is always a privilege. So I'd like to go there and get straight to it. So for those that don't know me, I'm 35 years old, and le doy gracias a Dios. Tengo una familia. I have, believe it or not, I have 6 children. I've been blessed with a wonderful, beautiful wife, along with 6 children. I have, 17-year-old all the way down to 2 months. So thank God for that opportunity that I've been blessed with. But, that almost came to be unreal. A while back, I grew up in a home where perhaps you can identify with me. I went to church as a child, so the seed was planted. And as I got older, I drifted away from the path of the Lord. I took a different step, and I made decisions that harm people, but also harm myself and my walk with Christ. And I know that some of you may identify, some of you may not, but there's a bigger picture here. There's a bigger message here. And I want you to today be able to take a hold of that and keep that in your minds and your hearts. So I grew up in San Mateo. I have, tattoos, a lot of tattoos on me that were part of the lifestyle I was living. I was a Norteño gang member, and for many years I grew up, in and out of jail. I started in juvenile hall, then progressed to become an adult and go to the county, and then from there, as they say in the streets, graduated and ended up in prison 4 times. And it was a very rough, violent. I was a very violent individual, in my home. I felt like I did not have the love that a family should have. In fact, I would almost consider growing up in a home where it was broken. Besides that, we went to church, but there were things at home that I did not feel as part of the family. Now, some of you guys may not identify with the gang life, but you may feel that at home you're not part of the family. But let me tell you something. You are part of God's family, and that is the bigger picture. That's what I came to realize and understand. So as I was growing up and it was part of these gangs, I didn't just want to be a gang member. I wanted to be a leader in the gang. I wanted to be just someone. I wanted to feel important, and part of that was maybe because of what I felt at home, being left out. So I wanted to climb up the ranks. Quería subirme y ser un líder, ser más grande en la pandilla. So what I started doing was, doing things that would classify me as a violent gang member who promoted fear upon rivals, or as you youngsters might call it now, the ops, right? So basically started doing drugs, started very heavy on alcohol, and then I started progressing into doing other things. I don't want to get too much into the details because I want God to be glorified through this, and I don't want war stories to be the subject of it. But I want you to know that what I was doing was not pleasing God. At the contrary, I always say I was digging myself a grave. I was digging myself a hole. And so I started going to jail as a result of my crimes. And I remember the first time I went to juvenile hall, I'm a small person. No soy tan grande. So a lot of the people, a lot of the kids, the juveniles that were there, they're taller, they're bigger, So, but which made me feel like I had to stand out, made me feel like I can defend myself. I can be this tough guy, But now, obviously, throughout this projection of my life, things have changed, and obviously, like the word says, the old things have passed, and God has changed my mindset. God has changed my heart. He took this cold stone heart and he turned it into flesh. He turned it into an open heart for Christ, for his renovation of my life. So basically, I'll tell you, I was in and out, and I remember a couple times, right, when I would ask myself, what am I doing here? What am I doing? I know about God. I do have a family, regardless of how they might be. And I realized that I had a void in me because I did not have that relationship with God. Or I did not experience at that time the real love of God in my life. I was looking for it through these other things that I was doing. So I continued to live the same lifestyle, partied. I did a lot of things that did not please God, as I had mentioned. So it started coming down the wire, started coming down to basically I had to make a decision. I remember in 2007, I was turning 21, right? Yay, the big party, right? You're officially an adult. So I remember going and having a party. We had left the club in San Jose, came down to San Mateo, and we were partying at a hotel. You guys know it as Telly's. I hope you guys are not doing that, but just in case, it's something to be aware of. We were there. We were having a good time. According to at that time, I was having a good time. I was under the influence, and these individuals came. Somebody called them. I almost felt like a setup, but obviously, different gang members showed up, and a big fight broke out. And me being the leader, or trying to be the tough guy that I wanted to be, I stepped right into the middle, and I, almost initiated the fight, in other words, and ended up getting stabbed. I got stabbed 3 times. I got stabbed 1 inch away from my heart. I got stabbed in my back and on my leg. The one on my leg was as a result of once I got stabbed up here and over here, I dropped to the floor. But as I was falling to the floor, I remember that the guy who had the knife swung one more time, and I kicked up and it hit my leg. So I ended up with 3 stab wounds. But the worst one about it, the one that really almost took me out and I almost lost my life if it wasn't for God's intervention, my mother's prayers and people praying for me, was the one that hit my heart. At the time, I didn't realize that I had got hit that close to my heart. So I was on the floor laying, and I was bleeding, and I had excessive blood. And I just, when I realized that I had all this blood on me, I just started, I went into a shock. I think that's what they call it. I went to panic, and I started losing my air. I felt like I was dying. I remember literally, still touches my heart because I remember breathing, and I felt like I was losing my life slowly. Every breath that I took, I felt like I was leaving this earth. And I remember when I lost conscience as a result of it. But I just remember grabbing my chest and just breathing deep. I was taking deep breath, and I felt like, I was dying. This is it. And I remember I had a couple friends with me, and I had one of my homegirls that was just crying. I mean, it wasn't helping the situation, but I remember her crying because she felt the same thing. I was dying. And I remember her just calling my name and just saying, just bawling out, just crying and saying, please don't die. Please don't die. And now when I think about this, I feel like at times these are the prayers that, those are the prayers that my grandparents, that my mother, that my family, that others were doing for me. God heard, God intervened, God came through and He rescued me. I remember waking up, I was in a hospital bed, and I remember that all I can hear, I was waking up from the anesthesia, and all I could hear was, I think they call it the EKG, or one of those machines they have at the hospital. And it was right on my ear, on my right ear, and I can hear just the deet, deet, deet. It was monitoring my heart rate, I believe. And I remember that I slowly started opening my eyes. And as I started opening my eyes, I can feel just pain all over my body. I know I was under medication because they put the anesthesia, but I just felt pain in my body. I couldn't move. But I felt like, I felt like I was alone. I opened my eyes. I didn't see my family. I didn't see my homies, the people that supposed to be there with me. And I felt alone, but at the same time, and this is where I really started experiencing who God was. As I opened my eyes, I didn't see anybody there, but I felt a presence. And the presence that I felt wasn't a presence of fear. I wasn't scared or anything like that. In fact, I felt good. I felt like I was being comforted. I felt like I was in good hands. And I remember that I looked to the right, thinking that somebody was on this side. Remember, I couldn't move that much. But as I looked to the right, I didn't see anybody, but I felt God right there in that hospital room. And that was the first time that I felt that God was real in my life, that God was there when I really needed Him. And I don't know about you guys. I'm sure that you have, as teens, as youth, you have gone through some things in your life, maybe a little different, but you felt like you're alone. You felt like in the worst time of your life, or the worst trial, the worst tribulation. But let me tell you, you cry out to God, know that your parents' prayers and your church's prayers and those praying for you, they will be heard, and God will make Himself present. He will be there, as He did for me that day. So I remember that the doctors came into the hospital room right where I was at. Once I had woken up, and they looked at me and told me, they said, Mr. Garcia, because they were reading it off a transcript. And I remember clearly, and I will never, ever forget this. The doctor leaned down. I was laying flat on the bed. And he said, Mr. Garcia, and he started explaining what they did to me and what were my injuries. I had, as I mentioned, one stab wound 1 inch away from the heart, which was the more severe one. And he said, I don't know. And he looked down and said, but what I do know for sure, he was talking to me like he doesn't know how I made it, how I survived. But what he knew for sure, and I don't know if he was a believer or not, he said, but what I know for sure is that somebody was watching over you. And he pointed up. And I knew right there in that very moment that presence that I have felt right here to the right, and this doctor telling me that somebody was watching over me, I knew that was God. So let me tell you something. God saved my life. God rescued me. When the enemy wanted to take my life and bury me, when I was just going to be a memory, when I was basically just going to be remembered, maybe perhaps just by my homies that will go to my graveyard and say, hey, rest in peace, Drifter. Rest in peace, homie. None of that happened as a result of God's power in my life of prayer. So moving forward, at that very moment, I knew that I didn't really want that lifestyle anymore. I found out that the people who were supposed to be there for me were not there for me. So I decided to leave that lifestyle. I decided to kind of slowly back away from that lifestyle. But the enemy is a liar. He always tries to find a way. when you try to get closer to God, to disturb, to intervene. But God is stronger. God is always going to give us victory. But we make the decisions. We make the choice. So I remember that I slowly started to stop hanging around with my homies, to stop hanging out on the street, or as you guys call it, on the block, like I used to. I decided to slowly just pull back from that. But instead, the enemy is a liar. Instead, the enemy convinced me to sell drugs. Made me think like, okay, well, you're not going to be out on the block anymore. You're not going to be gangbanging on the street like that. But hey, get your money. Make that paper, right? Like you guys call it. So I started grinding. I started hustling. And I remember I started selling marijuana, marijuana. I started selling coke. And I remember that, yes, I was out of the gang lifestyle. I was still, part of it because I officially hadn't got out, but I slowly backed up. So now I was concentrating on selling weed, on selling these drugs and making money. And the devil made me think, hey, this is going good. He made me think like, hey, this is good. I'm not getting in trouble. Yeah, I could get caught, but I'm doing things, in a way where I won't get caught. And we were selling. But everything comes to an end. That the sinful lifestyle comes to an end. So I had fronted somebody. I don't know if you guys know what that means, but basically I gave somebody some drugs. They didn't have the money. What they were going to do is they were going to sell it and then pay me back. But, he had different plans. So I gave them the drugs. They were supposed to sell it and give me my money, but they never did. So essentially, they robbed me. And in that lifestyle I was living, that's a no-no. That is basically you can get killed for that or have severe consequences. So what ended up happening was that I was looking for this gentleman, for this person, and he kept ducking and dodging. He kept hiding. So we ended up finding him one day. Out of all the days, I remember being very, very intoxicated. One of my best friends had just gotten out of prison, doing 5 years. And we were celebrating his freedom. And I was at his house that night, and we were drinking, and obviously we were doing other things. And I remember that night, it was like around 3 a.m. when I left his house. And out of all the nights, I happened to be driving, which I shouldn't have been doing in the first place, but I had consequences for it. I remember driving. I remember pulling up to a stoplight, and guess who comes up? This gentleman comes up and pulls up right next to me. Without even knowing, just looked at each other, and I knew right there and then that I had to take action. So I told him to get out the car. He didn't want to. He took off. I chased him. He jumped in the freeway. As an idiot, I followed him, and we were speeding, doing about at least 90 miles an hour on the freeway. And I remember that I ended up hitting his car. I was trying to take him out. In all honesty, I was trying to kill him. But God's plan was different, because the devil comes to kill, steal, and destroy, but God comes to give us life and life in abundance. And I remember that in that very moment, I ended up hitting him with my vehicle. We both spun out. I crashed with the center divider, and he crashed as well. And even at that, because of the influence, under the influence, I couldn't think straight. So I remember crashing. My airbag exploded, hit me in my chest. Felt like it broke one of my ribs. I jumped out of the car, and I went to this gentleman's vehicle, and he was just laying there in his seat, and I still took it upon myself to hurt him. I left the scene, but sure enough, police were already on the way. Somebody had reported what had happened, and they arrested me. At this point in life, at this time, is where God tuvo que tratar con mi vida muy fuerte. This is where I can admit and say that is the point where I hit rock bottom, where I was basically going to end up either doing life in prison, or I was going to take my own life. I knew I was in for some big trouble. So at that point, I remember that I went down to the county jail, and they were reading all my charges, and they were reading that I was being booked for attempted murder. I was being booked for assault with a deadly weapon. I was being booked for DUI and a bunch of other things. I had 7 charges on me that night. And I remember that I was in my cell, in my room, and I knew that this was not good. And I remember my mother coming to visit me and telling me on one of these visits while I was in jail, the only one that can help you, that can rescue you from this one and from this place is God. Surrender your life to God. And those words just impacted me. Like I know it was God speaking through my mother. And I remember that she brought a pastor, Pastor Rosalio. I believe he's a pastor of Iglesia de Dios in San Mateo. And I remember this man being used by God to bring a message to me and just speak to me about the word and speak to me about hope. This is why it's very important, guys. You know, you guys, this campaña that you guys are having about the Great Commission. This is why sharing the good news. This is why sharing hope with those that are in need, with those that are outside, even though they've been inside in the church but have stepped out. We need to give them that word of hope, that word of freedom. The Bible says, John chapter 8:36, it says, the Son sets us free, and he sets us free indeed. That means that through the Son, Jesus Christ, we have freedom. Freedom from living this sinful nature. And so this pastor brought me word, and he brought me word of hope, of peace. And I just knew in that very moment after that visit, I walked back into my cell, and I had a cellmate. And most people will be embarrassed to cry or feel too tough to cry, in front of other men. And I remember in that time, I just dropped down on my knees, and in that very moment, I surrendered to God. I surrendered my life to Jesus, and it was the best decision that I ever made in my life, because I am here today as a result of God giving me a second opportunity to life. So to kind of sum it up, I remember that I started to feel change in me. I started reading the Bible. I had a Bible. That's one of the things that jails do have is they have Bibles available to inmates. And I remember having the Bible, and I started just reading. And every time I read the Bible, it gave me peace. Every time that I read something, it made me feel different from what the drugs did, different than what the gangs and girls and partying did. Even as cliche as it might sound, all that stuff didn't feel as good as reading the word and just praying. And I remember I just surrendered. I told God, because when I was going to court fighting that case, and I wasn't fighting it alone, let me tell you, the Lord was fighting that for me. I gave him that battle. The judge had on the preliminary, that's what they call it in one of the courts. I remember clearly the judge's word. He said, Mr. Garcia, it's based off these charges. You are facing 18 years to life in prison. I froze, my jaw locked up. I almost felt like I wanted to faint. I couldn't believe the words that were coming out of this judge's mouth to tell me that I was facing 18 years to life. I knew that I was in deep, that this time I was going to do a lot of time. But something at the end of me, something inside of me was telling me there is hope. Just pray. So I remember that I started praying. I started developing a close relationship with God in my cell, in that room. And I remember that as I grew more, as I started reading more of the word and praying, that I started having more faith. And this is where that word se cumple, donde dice, if we have faith, like a seed of mustard, those mountains would move. And that literally happened in my life. I remember it was time to sum up the court hearing. I had a few visits, and it was getting towards the end. I either had to go to trial. If I lost trial and I was convicted by the jury, I would get 18 years to life guaranteed. But if I took a deal, then I would be just do the time and be set free. So I remember that they offered me 3 deals. One was 6 years, and I declined that. I felt it in my heart to say no. What's another deal? Then they offered me a second deal, and that second deal was to do 3 years and a half. But even then, and my lawyer was telling me, take it, that's a really good deal for this case. But even then, God made me feel my spirit, no, tell him to give you the minimum, that you'll take the minimum. Sometimes they won't, but because God was working, he did. So I remember telling my lawyer, hey, can you tell him to just please maybe give me 2 years, and I'll take that. I'll sign that plea today. While I was in a holding room, in a cell, while my lawyer was talking to the judge and the DA, I was praying. I knelt down right there and I prayed to God, and I have faith. The lawyer comes back, and he has papers in his hands and a pen, and tells me with a great big smile, hey, sign right here. They have granted to give you 2 years to only serve 1, because you'll do half of that. It was more than what I expected. But all glory be to God. He saw me surrender. He saw my heart. It was pure. And the prayers that people were doing, people in church were doing for me, the brothers and sisters came through. So I ended up getting 2 years to do half, and I ended up doing 1 year after facing 18 years to life. I have been set free through Christ. And this is why, and the word says also, 2 Corinthians chapter 5, verse 17, we are a new creation in Christ. And God has pushed and washed all the old stuff, and he has made us new again through him. So I tell you today, thank you, because you're in the right place at the right time. And continue to grow in God. Continue to grow, develop your relationship. Your best teacher is going to be that word that transforms us, that changes us. But don't just keep it to yourself. Share it. Do what I'm doing right now here with you guys. This is a privilege for me. This is an honor. Do it. Maybe your testimony is different, but you can share that. There are people that feel suicidal. There are people that feel just pressure from culture. You can mark the difference. We are the salt of this world. We are light to this world. So take that light that God has ignited in you and share it with this world and mark a difference. God bless you. Thank you.